Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Gazette. I'm Andy, on location at the West Point Museum at the United States Military Academy, West Point, New York. We're here for Unseen History, which is our chance to go to a museum and allow them to take some stuff out of the vault. Most museums have only 2 to 3% of their collection on display, and for whatever reason, whether it doesn't fit with the display, whether it's too fragile, too rare, a lot of museums keep stuff behind the scenes. And this is our chance to talk with a curator and let them bring stuff out. Mike Diaz is the curator of history and uniforms here at the museum. Well, what do we see in front of us here?
Sure. So you have two different threads that I think help combine to the creation of West Point and can make West Point what it is during the American Revolution, though none of these artifacts would have been used here historically. So this is a Fife case that was at Bunker Hill. So used by a musician there.
Do we know which army?
On the American side,
okay.
I should specify.
No, that's... So June of 1775, Boston's under siege. You know, I think about the U.S. Army. It's just days old, literally, at that point. The Continental Army had just been adopted by a set of the various colonies. And force goes and camps on Bunker and Breed's Hill, and then the British launch those waves of attacks to try to dislodge them, right?
Right. Both sides learned that American troops tend to fight pretty well, fighting from behind prepared positions. And they're able to repel 2 charges up the hill by the British, and they flee before the third one only because they've run out of powder.
I mean, in horrific casualties, if
yes,
I remember right. Something closing on 50% casualties for the British.
Right, something that the British will remember for the rest of the war and will really try to avoid frontally attacking American positions. It's one of the things that makes West Point so secure after it gets built. They have these, now not just, hastily constructed field fortifications, but, professionally engineered fortresses lining the hills here that the British have no interest in trying to take on.
They're an expeditionary army, too. It's so easy for us to think about, from the American perspective, oh, well, we can get reinforcements from Massachusetts, Connecticut. They've got to get guys from Scotland or London or Hessians from Germany. They've got to come 2,000-3,000 miles away to replace a man. So I can see them wanting to really husband their troops.
Right. For, big picture, the American army is outnumbered by the full military might of the British Empire. But locally, right, the numbers of the size of the armies tend to be pretty close together. So it's going to be hard to have a decisive engagement if you've got two roughly equal armies using roughly equal technology, and the British have to be very careful not to risk their army on something that they don't know is going to work. It's something that, again, the making use of the terrain that they have here in the Hudson Highlands, like I said, it's a force multiplier.
And, you say the Hudson Highlands. I've never been to West Point before. I was shocked by how steep some of these hills are, how tall some of them are, the Palisades on the river. This is a really rugged area of New York.
Absolutely. In the 18th century, definition of the word, officers frequently describe this area as a wilderness, which is, not to say that it's, a barren wasteland, but it is. There's not a lot of major construction here, right? There's not a lot of because the terrain is so difficult. There's a few houses built on the river around West Point, but for the most part, this is it's a mountain range that has kind of been skipped over as far as heavy settlement goes in the Hudson Valley.
So because of Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill, those fighting here, the Army decides to build their fortifications here. What are the fortifications here for?
The main fortification, first Fort Arnold, and then very quickly gets its name changed to Fort Clinton, guards a chain that stretches across the Hudson. The idea of closing the navigation of the Hudson River to the British.
Okay.
So you got a chain on the river and a fort sitting on top of that. But if you stand on that fort and look behind you, well, there's another hill behind that. So you got to go build something on that hill.
Sure.
And then the hill behind that one. And so you have what ends up being a 2-mile wide fortified zone spanning either side of this 90-degree turn in the Hudson River, that the British would not have been able to attack any one position here without exposing themselves to fire from other positions. So it's a much more defense in depth and much more intricately laid out position than certainly the Continentals and Jordan Breed's Hill.
Well, for the item itself, we talked about it's a Fife case. What do we know about this itself?
It's a tin Fife case. It comes out of Massachusetts. There's not a lot of provenance. We don't know, unfortunately, who carried it during Bunker Hill, but that's the kind of the story that's been handed down with it, is that this was a witness artifact of the battle.
And Mike, one of the things that stands out to me is I get a good view of it here. Is this hinge on there?
A lot of these, you can see that it's kind of soldered on. that some Fife cases that the top just screws off, but this one does. Well, it's not cooperating today. I'm not going to force it.
Knowing tin, how it can rust shut, I certainly, yeah.
Right. But yeah, that one is hinged so that it is meant to just pop open.
And it's interesting how that's different than a lot of ones you see reenactors use today, or especially the ones that are leather or something like that.
Right. So again, it tells us that there's not necessarily a standard, right? That these are being made by militias organized at the local and
county level,
and
right?
at the county and colonial level. There's not a big contract that the Continental Army is signing to get these, particularly not this early in the war.
So why would the Fifes needed a case?
Sure.
Do we know what this would have been used for? I mean, I get it's a Fife case, but what would a Fife case? Why
Sure.
did they need one?
So, Fife's a wood instrument, pretty fragile. This is expected to move with the army.
This is a piece, and important to state here. Then this is 1775. This is a piece of military equipment that someone is carrying 1 month or 2 months into a war. Already.
Yes. And I think, that speaks to one, the already long military history of of British North America, and also the extent to which those minute companies and particularly those New England militias were taking their training seriously. Right, that there had been the kind of patriots had taken over the New England militias in the years before the shooting really starts, and they are equipping and training themselves for a military conflict.
It's probably worth pointing out, too, that we're only, 11, 12 years removed from another global war that the New England militias have been heavily involved in. So there was a lot of experience and equipment probably still in the system from the French and Indian.
Yeah, so maybe this might have been used by one of the provincial regiments. Who knows? But.
So Mike, talking about we'd have drumsticks that we'll get to in a second. The Fife case here. Both these are musical items. What is the role of music in the American Revolution? Maybe
the most obvious answer is that it does play a role for morale and a spirit of corps, but also it's got a very tactical usage. There's no radios, right? The command is by sound. The voice only carries so far. It gets worn out pretty fast, as you can unfortunately hear a little bit of scratchiness in me. The fife is this really shrill instrument. It cuts through a lot of noise. It's not the most pleasant sound. But it carries. And so every command that could be given has a corresponding fife and drum beat. So moving on, Mike, what are the other two items that we have here? Sure. So this is a pair of drumsticks that were used in the Battle of Valcour Island in 1776. So this is the first turning back of a British attempt to come down the Hudson and take control of that important Hudson River corridor. So the British tried, they came down from Canada, they hit the top of Lake Champlain and then started building a Greenwood Navy, kind of some ships that would, some watercraft that would take their army down over the water, which of course much easier to do that than going by land. And the Americans under Benedict Arnold are doing the same on the south side of the lake. So both sides are kind of rapidly trying to construct ships and get arms and armament for them and crews together, and then they sail out. They run into each other. They fight each other to a draw. And everyone goes home. But that delays the British invasion of New York by a year. And so that when they come down by land next time in 1777, there's defenses prepared.
And this is Burgoyne's army that's on its way eventually to Saratoga, right?
Right. That runs into first the Northern Department of the Continental Army, commanded first by General Schuyler and then by General Horatio Gates, is actually the guy in charge during the battles of Saratoga.
And thinking about to tie this back to West Point, eventually Burgoyne's army is coming here from the north.
Right.
And ideally he's supposed to link up with Henry Clinton coming out of New York here, right? Basically between here and Albany. That's where they're supposed to meet. Right.
Here right in the middle of the Hudson Valleys would be one of the possible meeting points for them.
So for the drumsticks themselves, is there anything that's unusual about them? Or do we know how they came here to the museum?
So they're mismatched, right? They're
different lengths, different wood, apparently.
And so unclear if these were used as a set, and this is just kind of making do with what they had, or were these somehow two different drumsticks that were kind of independently
collected? The left and right,
and came from a different source. So I do anytime we can get to that world of scarcity that people in the Revolution and so much of previous history operated in, where you make use of what you have. If the sticks didn't match, they'll still do the job.
One is longer, more tapered, one's a little bit more blunt. It's interesting to see the different shape for drumsticks.
Right.
Something that today you would think of the commonality of an item.
Right.
And these are obviously, something that can be made at home very easily, and how the individual maker's preferences would show in them.
Right. Yeah. There's not a factory lathe kind of turning out 3,000 of these a day. That these are handmade, by someone that is a craftsman.
All right, Mike. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come out here and talk about these things. I think it's fascinating. Music and the Revolution, like these two separate items with provenance, both ending up here. Again, the heart of the Army here at West Point. Thank you for having us today.
Hey, my pleasure.
Well, again, here's our chance for On-Scene History, to get some stuff out of the vault, to get to look at some items you wouldn't normally get to see, and to draw some connections from history to see these items and see them in a bigger picture. I hope you get a chance to come out to the museum here. It's a fascinating place to visit with an excellent collection. For Revolutionary Gazette, I'm Andy. We'll catch you next time.